In January 2024, researchers at Columbia University published something nobody had been able to measure before. Using a new laser-based imaging technique, they counted the plastic particles in ordinary bottled water and found an average of 240,000 detectable plastic fragments per liter, with about 90% of those being nanoplastics, small enough to pass through your gut wall and into your bloodstream. That is 10 to 100 times higher than anything earlier studies had reported, not because the water changed, but because the old equipment literally could not see particles that small. The study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, tested 3 unnamed major American brands, and every single one came back loaded. That number matters here because where your water comes from and what container it sits in for weeks on a truck determines how much of that plastic ends up in your glass. So let's start with the 5 brands that have been quietly cutting corners on both the source and the science, and end with the 5 that are actually worth your money. Poland Spring, the legal loophole. Poland Spring built its name on an actual spring in Poland Spring, Maine, a source so famous that by the late 1800s people were traveling there specifically to drink from it. For generations, that name meant something real. You were paying for water that came out of the ground in one specific beautiful place in 2003, and again in a class action filed in 2017. Consumers accused the company of selling ordinary treated groundwater under a spring water label, with plaintiffs claiming the original Maine spring had run dry decades earlier. A federal judge in Connecticut refused to dismiss that case as recently as this past year, ruling it was still an open legal question in 8 states whether Poland Spring even qualifies as spring water under FDA and state definitions. Here is where the ownership story gets interesting. Nestlé owned this brand for nearly 2 decades as Nestlé Waters North America. Then in 2021, Nestlé sold the entire North American water division, Poland Spring included, to 2 private equity firms, One Rock Capital Partners and Metropolis and Company, for $4.3 billion, and renamed the whole operation BlueTriton Brands. Private equity firms do not acquire beloved American water brands because they love hydration. In plain language, they acquire cash-generating consumer brands because bottled water sold under a trusted legacy name can be priced at a premium while the actual product costs pennies to produce. BlueTriton has since been sued again, this time by the environmental group Earth Island Institute, for making sustainability claims that its own lawyers argued in court were non-actionable puffery, meaning the company's attorneys admitted in writing that the green marketing on your bottle was not meant to be taken as a factual promise. You trusted the name on that label because it once meant a real place. Now the company that owns it argues in federal court that the words on the bottle are not meant to be believed. Dasani, the tap water disguise. Dasani launched in 1999 as Coca-Cola's answer to Aquafina, and it never pretended to come from a mountain spring. What most people don't realize is exactly how ordinary its source really is. Dasani starts as municipal tap water, pulled from the same local water supply that fills your kitchen faucet, then runs through reverse osmosis and nanofiltration before Coca-Cola adds back a proprietary blend of minerals. The ingredient label reads, purified water, magnesium sulfate, and potassium chloride. And that magnesium sulfate is the same compound sold in pharmacies as Epsom salt Coca-Cola. Adds these minerals purely for taste consistency, not for any health benefit, and the company itself labels them on the bottle as minerals added for taste. In plain language, you are paying grocery store prices for filtered tap water with Epsom salt and table salt dissolved into it, sold in a bottle that costs the company a fraction of a cent to fill. You blamed your own picky palate when Dasani tasted slightly bitter or metallic straight from the bottle. The problem was never you. It was the magnesium sulfate doing exactly what it's designed to do. Fiji Water, the nostalgia exploitation. Fiji Water was founded in 1996 by Canadian businessman David Gilmore under the name Natural Waters of Viti Limited, built around one genuinely rare selling point, an artesian aquifer on the island of Viti Levu, untouched by industrial development. That origin story sold a real fantasy, water from a remote Pacific paradise shipped straight to your table. In 2004, billionaire couple Stuart and Linda Resnick acquired Fiji Water for roughly $50 to $63 million through their holding company, now called the Wonderful Company, the same corporation behind Palm, Wonderful Juice, and Wonderful Pistachios. Billion-dollar agricultural conglomerates do not acquire tropical water brands because they love Fiji. They acquire them because a compelling origin story lets you charge premium prices for something that costs almost nothing to extract. In January 2025, the environmental watchdog group, the Plastic Coalition, filed a lawsuit against Fiji Water, alleging its natural artesian water marketing was false given lab tests showing the water contained microplastics and BPA. Reporting has also documented that the plastic bottles themselves are manufactured in China and shipped across the Pacific before being filled in Fiji and shipped again to American shelves, while roughly half the population on that same island still lacks reliably safe drinking water. You pictured pristine rainforest when you cracked open that square bottle. According to court filings, what you were actually drinking may have included the exact plastic contamination the marketing promised you were paying to avoid Aquafina, the legal deception. Aquafina hit shelves from PepsiCo as a purified water brand, and like Dasani, its actual sourcing has always been ordinary municipal water run through a filtration process, rather than any natural spring. PepsiCo built the brand's visual identity around a mountain and water drop logo suggesting alpine purity, a choice that eventually drew enough consumer pushback that the company added the words public water source to its labeling in 2007 after pressure from consumer advocacy groups. The filtration itself, reverse osmosis plus additional purification steps, does remove most contaminants effectively, and Aquafina is not dangerous to drink. But the entire premium price tag rests on packaging that visually implies a natural mountain origin for water that started in the same municipal pipe serving the rest of your city. In plain language, you are paying a mountain spring markup for a filtration process you could largely replicate at home with a countertop filter costing less than $10. Arrowhead, the great California betrayal. Arrowhead built its identity around California mountain springs, and for decades that identity mattered enough that the brand became a fixture in California households, specifically because it felt local and authentic. That trust turned out to be resting on water the company may not have had the legal right to take in the first place. Arrowhead is now owned by BlueTriton, the same private equity-controlled entity that owns Poland Spring. Following a multi-year investigation prompted by public complaints during a severe drought, California's State Water Resources Control Board determined in 2023 that BlueTriton had no legal right to most of the water it was extracting from springs along Strawberry Creek in the San Bernardino National Forest and ordered the company to stop diverting roughly 80% of what it had historically taken. BlueTriton is currently challenging that order in court rather than complying. The bottled water industry is counting on your brand loyalty and your nostalgia to override the ingredient label sitting right there on the bottle. These 5 companies still deserve that trust. Mountain Valley Spring Water has bottled continuously from the same protected spring in the Ouachita Mountains near Hot Springs, Arkansas, since 1871. And it has stayed in glass rather than plastic for nearly all of that history. The company was returned to Arkansas ownership in 2004 after more than a century under outside control, and it remains bottled in 100% recyclable glass, which sidesteps most of the plastic leaching concerns entirely. At roughly $1 an ounce more than a plastic bottle of Poland Spring, spread across a year of grocery shopping, that difference amounts to less than a single fast food lunch Icelandic glacial draws exclusively from the Ulfus Spring in Iceland, a source so large it covers roughly 200 square miles beneath a natural lava rock filter, and the company holds sole commercial rights to that single spring. Its bottling facility became the first carbon-neutral certified bottled water plant in the world, verified by an independent third-party carbon auditor. Liquid Death sources its still water from natural springs in the Pacific Northwest and packages it exclusively in aluminum cans instead of plastic. A Decision founder, Mike Cesario, built the entire brand around from day one in 2019. Aluminum recycles indefinitely without the microplastic shedding that plagues PET bottles sitting on warehouse shelves for months, and the company has grown into a business valued in the hundreds of millions, specifically because consumers responded to that packaging choice. Just water packages spring water in a paper-based Tetra Pak carton reinforced with a thin plant-based cap, cutting the plastic content by a significant margin compared to a standard bottle. The ingredient list is exactly one item, spring water, with no added minerals or flavoring agents. Saratoga Spring Water has bottled from its natural springs in Saratoga Springs, New York, since the 1870s, and has remained under independent ownership rather than being absorbed into a multinational beverage conglomerate. Do this test at home. Compare the mineral taste side by side with a plastic bottled national brand left in a hot car for an hour, and the difference in plastic aftertaste is immediately obvious. That bottled water in your kitchen right now is either a genuine spring, protected and named honestly, or it is filtered tap water wearing a mountain on the label while sitting in plastic that sheds nanoplastics by the hundreds of thousands per liter. Subscribe and turn on notifications because next week I'm applying this same source and ownership breakdown to the coffee sitting in your pantry, and what I found in that supply chain is worse than the water.